Hi, I'm Matt Cranston with Sudbury TV, and welcome to another episode of The Old-Fashioned Way, a show that celebrates modern people who still do things the same way our great-grandparents did. It's that time of year again, when there's snow on the ground, but the days are getting warmer while the nights still get below freezing. And traditionally, on farms all throughout this region, there was still one harvest to be had. Of course, I'm talking about maple syrup. And in this episode, we'll explore the entire process of making it and the technology that's evolved since the native tribes taught it to our pilgrim ancestors. I'm here at Mass Audubon's beautiful Drumlin Farm Wildlife Sanctuary in Lincoln, Massachusetts, where they make maple syrup pretty much the same way my grandfather did on his farm back in the early 1900s. I'm here with senior naturalist Tia Pinney. Tia's going to explain to us the entire process from tree to pancakes. Now Tia, let's get right to it. You can't just plug in a bottle into these things and get syrup right out of the tree. What's this bucket and what's in there?
It'd be nice if we could get the syrup right out of the tree, but it's not going to happen. What's in the bucket now is sap. We've drilled a hole into the tree, and the sap flows right out of that hole, and we collect it in buckets.
And what is sap then?
Sap is essentially the lifeblood of a tree. Right now, at this time of year, the sap is moving from the roots up into the top of the tree, all the way out to the ends of every single branch in order to help those buds open so they can grow some new leaves.
So if we take sap out of it, does it hurt the tree?
No, we're not taking enough sap to say so. This tree produces thousands and thousands of gallons every spring, and we're taking probably 100.
Really? So
at the most.
It doesn't harm the tree at all?
No.
So how much sap comes out of a maple tree?
It depends on the tree, depends on the season, depends on last summer's weather. There are lots of factors involved in this. And so on a good year, we figure we will produce about a gallon of syrup per tap.
Per tap. And how many taps do you have on the premises?
We put out about 80 taps or so per year.
Wow, that's a lot of sap.
It is a lot of sap, a lot to collect, it weighs a lot.
So when you say taps, what do you mean by that? What is a tap?
A tap is it's sort of what it sounds like. It's a small spile or tap that we drill a hole in the tree and knock that spile into the tree, and the sap flows out of it's a hollow tube. Sap flows out into the bucket.
And the bucket hangs on the spile?
The bucket does hang on it, yep. You have to have something strong enough to hang the bucket because it will get heavy. These are like 3-gallon buckets.
Can you tap a tree year after year?
You can tap a tree repeatedly. You cannot use the same hole. Every tap has to be a certain distance from a hole in the past. The tree scars over the hole from last year's tap, and eventually you'll end up with a number of scars, but you can still get your taps in. We use a smaller diameter tap now. It's less damage to the tree. The scarring is less invasive in terms of the way the tree recovers.
So in the short term, the tree is harmed, but in the long term, it's not a big factor?
Correct. In the short term, you've made a hole in the tree. In the long term, the tree is fine, and the tree the tree blocks off that hole quite quickly once you've taken the tap out after the season.
And how long is the sugaring season?
Totally depends on the weather. It depends on, you need days that are above freezing. You want the daytime to be in the high 30s, mid 40s, and you need nights that go back down into the 20s. So you need, at any point between mid-January to say the end of March, you could have days like that, and that's when the sap will flow. The flow will stop if it gets too cold. Then the season it ends when the nights get too warm. As soon as the nights stay well above freezing.
Right, because the sap changes throughout the tree.
Correct. The sap, once the sap is able to get all the way up to the ends of the tree, of the branches, then the season is pretty much over.
The sap gets bitter, right?
The sap gets bitter.
And the seasons are getting shorter.
Much shorter. When I was a kid, I grew up in northern Connecticut, and our season would start no earlier than the beginning of March, and now the season starts well earlier than that and ends much sooner.
And what accounts for that?
Climate change.
Really?
Absolutely.
Yep.
It's all climate change. The weather is more erratic during our winter, and our last frost is moved much earlier. So as the nights get warmer earlier in the spring, then that's the end of your season.
Right. And if it keeps going the way it's going, it's going to be hard to make maple syrup in these parts.
I would venture that if it keeps going the way it's going, we wouldn't be able to make maple syrup in Massachusetts by the end of the century.
So they call it maple syrup for a reason. Can you get maple syrup out of oak trees?
No, absolutely not. You can only get them out of maple trees.
But there are different types of maple trees.
There are different types of maple trees. The sugar maple is named the sugar maple because that's the sweetest sap. So that's the best sap to use. But you can tap a Norway maple, you can tap a red maple, you can tap a silver maple, you can tap a box elder, which is a type of maple.
And so this sap that flows in the tree, is it water? Is there sugar in there? Is it mapley? What is it exactly?
So only if you have a really good imagination can you get any flavor out of this, because it's about 98% water. There is about 2% sugar, and so you've got to take out a whole lot of water before you get any flavor, any maple flavor. And the flavor comes not just from the sugar, but from the other compounds that are unique to maple trees.
So if you take this sap and you want to make it into maple syrup, what do you have to do to it?
You got to boil away a whole lot of water. You got to boil away approximately 40 to 50 gallons of water to create 1 gallon of syrup.
And do you do that here on the premises?
We do. We have an evaporator. Great big machine just designed to boil water.
Really? Well, let's go see it.
Absolutely.
All right. So here we are. This is where the magic happens. This is a giant cast iron beast. What is it exactly and what does it do?
This is an evaporator. It's not a very modern evaporator, but it functions quite well. It increases the surface area. There's lots of little slots inside this giant box so that we get lots of heat interacting with the sap to boil off the water as quickly as possible.
Okay, so you put sap into the evaporator. Mm-hmm. And how long does it take for it to come out as maple syrup?
Well, it depends on the evaporator, it depends on a number of factors, the heat of the fire, all those kinds of things. But in general, once the evaporator is full, it's probably 4 to 6 hours here to get it to a point where we take it off and take it inside to actually finish it to syrup. And that's probably another hour or so.
So you're boiling the sap in there and you're using
Correct.
This wood as
We are.
the fuel.
Our fuel is wood. We have a lot of wood here. Trees come down all the time on the sanctuary, so we keep them and chop them up. So we're able to supply our own fuel.
And how do you know when it's done in the evaporator and it's time to take it in and finish it inside?
Okay, so out here we're using a thermometer. When we get to 219 degrees on our syrup thermometer, and it comes off of the evaporator to take inside to finish, and finish is 221.
You draw it off of here, and do you filter it at all?
Not here. We take it inside. We truly boil it until it's done, and then we run it through special wool and polyester filters.
And how can people taste your Drumlin Farm syrup?
Well, so we do sell our syrup at our admissions window, but we don't have a lot, so it sells out pretty quickly usually. But during our sugaring season, we offer programming. We have a number of different kinds of programming that you can come to with your family, or on the weekends in general. If the sap is flowing on the weekends, the evaporator will be running, and you can come out and check it out.
What about pancake breakfast?
We do have a pancake breakfast.
That's my favorite.
Yeah, pancake breakfast is usually probably about the second week in March is generally pancake breakfast, where you can come and have Drumlin Farm sausage and potatoes and some pancakes with some syrup. It's a great way to start the day.
And how long have you been making maple syrup here at Drumlin Farm?
At least 50, 60 years, I'd estimate.
Really?
Yeah.
That's a long time.
As long as Drumlin has been here, I think Drumlin's been making syrup.
But people have been making syrup much longer than that.
Absolutely. The Indians, the Native Americans, first figured out how to make syrup probably 500, 1,000 years ago.
And the Pilgrims, the colonists?
The colonists learned how to do it from the Indians, and off they went.
So you've given me a really good idea. I think we should head out to Old Sturbridge Village and see how the colonists made maple syrup.
That's a great idea.
Thank you for your time here at Drumlin Farm. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you.
Looks like my ride is here to take me over the river and through the woods to tour the living history museum that is Old Sturbridge Village. They do everything the old-fashioned way, recreating rural New England life from the early 19th century. After my ride, the horses drop me off at the meeting house on the town square to meet my tour guide for the day.
Hi, how are you?
Doing very well. Welcome to Old Sturbridge Village.
This place is amazing.
Yeah, this place is a recreated village with buildings from all over New England, all 6 New England states.
You mean buildings like a blacksmith, a potter, all that kind of stuff?
Absolutely. We have everything from farmhouses to working trade shops, everything from a blacksmith to a potter shop to a tinner.
So like a blacksmith, you mean an actual blacksmith?
Oh, absolutely. So in all of our different trade shops and our houses, we have working interpreters there to not only talk about the past, but actually do it.
And I'm told you make maple syrup here too.
Absolutely. We have a sugar camp right over here where we have sumac spiles tapping our maple trees. We have poplar troughs collecting it, and we use large laundry kettles to boil away all that water.
And so what do you do when you have finished maple syrup?
Yeah, so we get it down to a syrup state outside, but then we bring it inside where they boil it down to a sugar state. And then with that sugar, that's what we can use in a baking and also a preservative.
So you're saying you actually bake with it here?
Oh, absolutely. Our different farmhouses are working farmhouses. So they actually do the food preservation, the cooking, gardening, you name it.
Really, I can't wait to go around and see it all and taste everything.
Can't wait to have you.
Hello and welcome to Old Sturbridge Village, where we are tapping trees for maple syrup and maple sugar the way it was done in the 19th century. I'm using a 1/2-inch T-handled auger, and this is just a common carpentry tool used for many other things around the farm. And so all this tool is factory made. I had to purchase it at the store. I'm not going to buy different tools for every hole I need to drill. And then a hand-carved wooden spile. This is sumac, is inserted to allow the sap to flow out. And into a trough we have waiting. Trough is hand-carved, so no special equipment. It's all about saving money and not spending money. And once we've collected enough sap to be worth boiling down, you bring it down to your sugar camp, and that's nothing special, just a fire pit and a place to hang a couple of kettles from. These kettles are the same kettles that I'd use for doing laundry or rendering lard or any other chore which required a lot of heat. So they're fairly expensive, but used for so many different things, and today it's maple sugaring. The fuel, there's a lot of pine in here. It's a lot of scrap wood. I would never do this inside a house because I'm going to generate a tremendous amount of steam. The European colonists who settled New England learned this skill from the Native Americans. It's only North American maples that this is possible with. And so when the settlers arrived, the natives were already producing maple sugar from trees. They had very different methods than even I used 200 years ago. The trees would have been sort of slashed or a large gash cut in to allow the sap to run out. And it would have been collected in, bark or skin vessels. They would have used a lot of freeze distillation, is what we call it today, when you simply would let the sap freeze and allow the temperature to concentrate the sugar to some degree. And they would have used wooden molds to finally form and keep their sugar. And them, just like us in the 19th century, could not keep syrup. It would spoil, ferment, it can grow mold, which is why we have to reduce it, and why the natives also had to reduce it all the way to the state of solid sugar.
So this is a small house. This is where we're finishing off the sugaring process.
So you're taking it right down to maple sugar?
Absolutely, boiling it down right to that sugar, so therefore we can use it for the rest of the year.
Well, I got to see how it works.
We're at the small house at Old Sturbridge Village. My job today is sugaring off, which means I'm taking maple syrup that's already been cooked down from the sap of the maple trees, and I have a small kettle over the fire, slowly boiling, so I can get more of the moisture out and it will become a very thick syrup. What I'm looking for is, as I put my wooden spoon into the syrup, it no longer drips off but coats the spoon. It's very thick. And I might take my spoon over to the window and see if I can see any sugar crystals forming in that syrup. The other way I might test it is, since we have lots of snow right now, get a small bowl of snow and pour a bit of syrup on it and see if it forms a very soft, almost candy texture. And if it does, and I would take my kettle from the fire and, using that same wooden spoon, stir it very quickly and continuously as it cools, so that the sugar crystals that are forming are very small, and it gives my sugar a very smooth texture. This mold has the maple sugar that we've just made. It's cooled, and it's starting to form into a loaf. And what I would like to do is to drain away the molasses inside. So I have a wooden plug, which I can remove from the bottom, and I will put it here, leave it near the fire to warm, and allow the molasses to drain out of the sugar. And it takes most of the brown color and the flavor away from the sugar. so that once I'm finished and we take it from the mold, instead of having a very dark color like all the molasses in the bottom of this mold, it should be very light like the center on this side. So the lighter my sugar, when I grate it, the less flavor it will have and the more it will resemble a white cane sugar.
So this looks like the farmhouse I grew up in.
Yeah, this is the Freeman farmhouse. This is the typical farm of the 1830s. We have a working livestock program and we have fields that we tend.
And they do anything indoors?
Absolutely. Every single day we cook and bake inside.
You mean they're baking right now?
Yes.
With maple sugar?
Yes.
All right, I gotta check that out.
And so we are today using something called maple sugar in our custard pie as part of our maple days. This is actually a form that we've grated ourselves. So we took one of our graters, which we actually have on the wall, and if you don't have that, you can also use a mortar and pestle. Today we actually just took it and grated this, and then that's what went into our custard pie. If we're looking to avoid the costs that might come with any kind of pure cane sugar or molasses, we might use this instead because this is something very local and we can use it right here in our farms and make it ourselves. We can also, if we'd like to talk about an anti-slavery movement that's happening in 1838, we can focus on buying this stuff or using this stuff as a way of protesting the slave trade or the slave sugar that's happening down in the West Indies as well. So we're using that today.
From Old Sturbridge Village, we head to Hollis Hills Farm in Fitchburg, Mass. to see how a fully modernized commercial sugar house uses the latest technology to make thousands of gallons of syrup each season. Owner Jim Latanzi showed us the state of the art, where buckets are a thing of the past.
So what we've got here, we have your standard maple tree. They're standard issue, they're everywhere. But we tap our tree just like you would when you're gonna hang the bucket. We're using the same size hole, but what we're doing is we're inserting a small plastic tap instead of hanging a bucket. What we've got here is a tube, and that tube is attached to another tube, and it makes it all the way down the hill. This one sugar bush, this woods, we have 2,200 of these taps set out here. And so the idea is that we don't have to empty all these buckets every day, and it makes life a lot easier. But we put vacuum on this line, and we insert the tap right back in, just like you would using a metal spout, and that's it. When it drips, it makes its way down into the tube. It's gonna make its way all the way down, all the way out to the vacuum house, and then from there it's pumped into a great big transfer tank, and we hold it there. Once we have enough, then we haul that back to the sugar house, and then we're gonna process it. You'll see that later.
And by processing, Jim means the device that gives a commercial sugar house a huge jump start on the boiling process.
So this is a miracle of modern science. Tell me what it is and how it makes things go faster.
So what we've got a reverse osmosis machine, an RO. It's basically a high pressure pump, and we take that raw sap that we saw coming out of the tubes down back, and we're gonna squeeze that. We're putting it under high pressure, and we're making a concentrate. So what we're doing is we're getting rid of a whole lot of the water before we start boiling. Way more efficient in the boiling process that we have upstairs. The way this thing works, we've got this high pressure pump, and it forces the sap through our 3 different membranes. The first time it goes through, it takes some of the water out, and from there it goes to the next membrane, and it takes some more water out. And by the time it comes out of the 3rd one, we're making some pretty sweet sap. So what we've got here, this is a gasification wood-fired evaporator. It's 3 feet wide, 13 feet long, and as it sits, it will evaporate 160 gallons an hour.
Wow.
Yeah, pretty fast. It's very similar to the other evaporators that you've seen. You know, the concept hasn't changed much, but what we're able to do with this machine in particular is run real hot.
Right.
What we're burning is green firewood. Like that tree was standing 2 weeks ago in the woods, we cut it down, processed for firewood, and that's what we're burning. It's a pretty neat concept because if you had a wood stove at home, you certainly couldn't burn this stuff.
No way.
No, you need 6 months a year.
Yeah.
So we're actually gonna force enough air using the blowers on this machine to burn the wood. That wood then gives off the water, that steam comes out. We're forcing so much air, we're able to burn that hydrogen. This evaporator will run at 2,500 degrees in the firebox. You're talking 1,000 degrees more than you can get out of just burning dry firewood.
So this is like the evaporator at Drumlin, but it's higher capacity and hotter.
Correct. The last part of our evaporator here is in this front pan. We monitor boiling temperature using this thermometer, and when it says, hey, the computer reads and says, we've got finished maple syrup, 219 degrees. It comes out here, over to this valve, and there's actually a computer-operated valve that opens up, and it says, okay, we're letting out maple syrup. Well, guess what? It's 218 degrees over there now. It's got to cook longer. Closes the valve right back up. That sap will sit in there and continue to boil, and all of a sudden we have more maple syrup. But the monitor here watches boiling temperature and then tells when to let the finished syrup out of the evaporator.
Once the finished syrup is drawn off, it's run through a filter to remove any particles, then bottled for public sale, or turned into a wide variety of treats, which you should sample at the Hollis Hills Farm Pancake Breakfast each weekend in March. They've got live music, animals, demonstrations, and a breakfast buffet with all the favorites. Be sure to save room for maple donuts, maple cotton candy, and an old tradition called sugar on snow.
So what we got is we're making sugar on snow.
Okay.
We take syrup, we boil it farther, bring it up to about 240 degrees. As I lay that hot syrup right out on the cold snow, just like this, what it's going to do is it cools, it forms taffy. It's a traditional sugar house treat, been served for hundreds of years in sugar houses. And you take your stick, you're going to push it right into that taffy, and you start to roll it up just like this.
All right.
Thank you much. Enjoy.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, man. Oh, that is so amazingly good.
Well, thank you for coming out to the sugar house.
And thank you for having us.
Of course.
That's going to do it for this episode of The Old Fashioned Way. Until next time, don't take any wooden nickels.